This video will be an in-depth tutorial on how I paint a watercolor portrait. We'll pick a limited palette of 3 colors and do a quick color mixing exercise. Then I will explain how watercolor layering technique works so that you are well prepared. Then I'll show you how to paint a portrait in 5 layers more or less, how to stylize it, and since I always mess up, how to correct those mess ups. So let's dive in. Let's prepare colors first. I selected only 3 colors for this portrait. We'll need yellow, red, and either blue or something dark. Find colors that are similar to mine, but you don't have to have the exact same shades or brand. But if you yet didn't build your palette, this might be a good place to start because all of these colors are versatile for mixing. Let's put the darks aside for now and focus on the yellow and red as they'll create our skin tone base. This is quinacridone gold and alizarin crimson that I use very frequently. I'll swatch them here so that you can see what they look like in full strength and then watered down. There is actually no white paint when using watercolor. If you want to lighten something, you need to add more clean water into the mix. You have to get used to watering down your paint a lot, and I really recommend you to practice this on a spare sheet of paper before you start painting a portrait. It will be a great help. Now this is a quick exercise to help you find a proper skin tone base. We'll start with the yellow and make a swatch. Now let's add a bit of red inside that yellow and increase the amount of red gradually. Try not to overpower your yellow with red immediately because we want to see how the color changes as we progress. By the end of this, we're back to red. Somewhere in the middle of this lineup, there's your skin tone. Those colors on the left lean towards yellow and those on the right lean towards red. You always have to judge the skin tone mixture when you compare this with your reference. Sometimes you'll need redder and other times more yellow skin tone base. We won't be able to mix darker skin tones with just these 2 colors. You would have to add the 3rd color into the mix. But this particular portrait that I'll be painting today has a pale skin and strong dramatic lighting, so this is the base that I need. Here I'm adding clean water to the swatches to show you what those colors look like in their more transparent form. I need to choose my 3rd color now, and this was a dilemma. Normally I would just go for blue, but this portrait needed strong contrast and I assumed Payne's Gray will do better. When I cannot decide on a proper limited palette, I just test out what the mixture looks like. So we need to mix this color with the skin tone base so that we can paint deep shadows with that mixture. I was considering Payne's Gray, then Sodalite Genuine, which is a dark granulating blue, and the effect could have been interesting, and the last one was Delft Blue, and normally this one would be my choice. I created a skin tone base and then mixed all those contestants into it to see what hue and texture would the final result have. I liked both mixes with Payne's Gray and Sodalite Genuine, but the latter granulated a little too much for portrait work, and so I ended up using Payne's Gray as my 3rd color for this portrait. Please do not underestimate how important it is to know your colors before you start to paint. This is my very first tip. Do these exercises beforehand. You'll only have to deal with laying down your washes if you are prepared. I try to avoid large palettes filled with many colors in order to make my process less nerve-wracking and avoid weird accidental mixes throughout the process. I wish I could leave this pre-painting workout and jump ahead, but I want to show you one more technicality before we're ready. Let's demonstrate how the layering technique works and create a cheat sheet to give the process comprehensive structure. So let's start with a base skin tone. It's watered down and I'm going to do 5 swatches here. Let them dry completely. These represent first layer. Let's add 2nd layer of the skin tone. Your next layer always needs to sit on top of completely dry first wash, and upon drying you can notice how those colors sort of sum up. Transparent paint works like a colored glass. So this is exactly how we'll paint our portrait in layers. The 3rd layer will be pure alizarin crimson watered down. We will add these to places that need more red and it will influence the skin color base underneath. Last 2 layers need to be much darker as they will be dedicated for the shadows of the face. And for this we'll add Payne's Gray. Here I swatched with clean Payne's Gray on top of the previous layers, but in the portrait itself, I usually mix the Payne's Gray into the skin tone base. We can dry this and add the very last 5th layer on top of it all, and here we basically have a guide on how to proceed and what to add in each layer. I numbered these and cut them into individual sheets and use them throughout the process so that I don't jump around and keep the entire process somewhat comprehensive. Okay, where's my sketch? Oh, here it is. I work on a 300 GSM cotton paper called Canson Moulin du Roi, but any cotton paper will do the job. Try and get cotton for this technique as it allows for as many layers as you'll need. Actually, if your technique isn't working, first check your materials because they might be the culprit, especially paper. Good news are that you cannot mess up with your first layer, the difficulty will come later. Here you only focus on laying down something like a base for your skin tone and also on establishing which areas need to remain completely white. Those are usually the spots that are hit with light directly. I purposefully chose the reference with strong lighting today and I will mess up a lot in the following layers, but the goal here is not to be scared and practice tackling difficult shadows. Watercolor presents you with two main challenges. First one is the absence of white paint. All your white is your paper and you have to leave unpainted areas behind if you want to show light. The other challenge is avoiding watercolor mischiefs like blooms in your washes, but more about that later. Here, if any blooms happen, you'll cover them up in the following layers. I just wanted to show you one thing here, and those are the edges. We've got hard edges and we've got soft edges. What's a hard edge? It's something that watercolor naturally forms when you place wet color onto the dry surface. This is a hard edge, for example, and then there is soft edge. Even though this is not 100% important area, you can see that this is a soft edge. It's a soft transition between one color to the other. Technique of creating hard edges is very simple. You just place the color and leave it there on a dry surface. The edge forms by itself, but the technique of creating soft edge is a little difficult. It usually involves placing the color and then softening that edge with a damp brush. I usually dampen my brush with clean water. There's no pigment on it and I'll just like soften it very gently and leave it like that. You cannot have a lot of water on your brush. If you do, that wash will suck in the water and will create blooms like this one. Sometimes you need a hard edge, sometimes you need a soft edge. It depends. For example, look at how nice the hard edge looks here. Like it emphasizes that highlight if you have a hard edge. On the other hand, there are certain areas that could really benefit from having a soft transition, like here. This shadow does not have a completely hard edge. It will have a hard edge here, but a soft edge here. So just pay close attention to your reference because these edges that they can really push the painting to the next level. Let's paint in the second layer, but please notice how the first layer faded upon drying, and this is what this layer is for. It will deepen areas that need stronger color. You already know how edges work and you can see the technique here more closely. Some of them I'm leaving hard and some I'm softening. It is not all that easy actually to lay down a flat wash, so my strategy is to tilt my board a little and the paint then can run towards me, and I lay the paint from the forehead towards the neck and not the other way around. I was thinking what would help you ease a little during this phase of laying down the wash, and for me what works is to keep it as watery as possible because that makes it dry slowly. I think the living watercolor nightmare is when your wash dries quickly after you lay it down and you don't have time to influence your edges or even create gradients, and so try really work with tons of water and even re-wet an area if it's stubborn and dries quickly. Remember from the layering exercise that third layer is just a blush. We'll now glaze some transparent red over certain areas. There are parts of the face that need more red, and when you add it, they will look more alive. Usually these are the cheeks, nose and lips. Nose is the most important because we have to create the illusion of it stepping out of the form. We're at the fourth layer and I must admit this one is somewhat challenging. I offer you this fact to grab and hold on to when you're in panic state, and that is your wash is never as dark as it seems. When you think about it, all that we see now is the white sea of paper that surrounds the portrait, and when you compare anything against white it looks much darker. Also remember how the washes fade. You are only left with about 50% of this intensity when everything is dry. So once you dry this and you also add colors to the hair and background, you'll be left with just about 25% of this color intensity. You'll see that shortly in the video. But yeah, in this layer, we need to create strong washes that represent shadows, cast shadows in this case, caused by very strong light. You cannot be shy about these shadows because without them there is no contrast and no drama that makes this portrait stand out so much. But at the same time, the wash needs to be transparent. It takes a bit of practice, but as scary as it might seem, it is also the most rewarding and exciting part of the painting process. I struggled so much during this part. Also, my wash kept drying too soon and the solution was to re-wet it with paint so that I can continue adjusting its shape. I had to paint quickly, but at the same time, when I mess up the shape of the shadows, it really shows in the end result. There is so much more to be said about each step, and this video can only be so long, so feel free to ask questions if I didn't cover something important. But I will also put up a real-time video of this process up on my Patreon with a sketch so that you can paint along in your own speed and improve your technique. I post about 4 to 5 videos to my Patreon each month so that my patrons can practice as much as they want to, and I'm more than grateful for their support. Finally, we can chill a little. This layer is not so difficult and it's like an in-between. I like to paint it before I finish the face because this way we'll be able to better judge the value of our shadows and just notice once I paint the black hair in how light the shadows suddenly appear in comparison. I don't like to paint very realistic hair. I only pay a little attention to where there is lighter and darker parts of the hair, and I even made some expressive splatters and let it dry this way. This is the final layer, the deepening of the shadows. You can now clearly see that one shadow layer might not be sufficient. Certain parts here need darkening in order to create a convincing dramatic lighting effect. I'm also covering eyebrows and some details in this layer. On some occasions the shadow still was not sufficient, so I had to add more layers to finally achieve the depth that was needed. Constantly comparing all the parts of the face together. You can always add multiple layers on top, and that's how you correct any area. But it's difficult, if not impossible, to remove paint and create a clear highlight. The most difficult area for me during this entire portrait was the nose. It really was a lot of adjustments, but at this stage of the process you can already see the entire face and you don't even realize how long it takes to do the corrections because it's just so rewarding and you're nearing the end, so yeah, you're in the zone. We essentially painted the entire portrait here. We have the face finished and now it's up to you if you stop here and throw yourself into another study or try to push the painting further and stylize it or create a realistic finish. I like stylized approach myself more than trying to portray a realistic looking person hanging out in their everyday clothes, just because I tend to think about my work as not portraying concrete people but rather portraying a spirit or emotion. So while I try to go for the likeness in the face, everything else is just an atmosphere, and watercolor can greatly support this endeavor. Sometimes I plan the stylization, but 90% of the time I just improvise it. Honestly, I wouldn't advise to do this because you can easily mess up all the previous work, which I often do, but I operate under a very limited amount of time, so I just go with my guts. For this portrait, I will need her gaze to try to drag you somewhere, and I thought why not through a circle, so that shape provided some negative space to give her freedom in otherwise crowded space. It's just an abstract concept that I had in mind for the stylization. I used shadow violet color, which granulates, and it's also duochromatic for the background, but I previously dampened that with clean water so that the paint spread it nicely, and it's just easier to make a wash look seamless this way. I created some expressive flower-like shapes with red paint and salt, and then I painted second layer of the background to seal the texture inside. Too bad that I later decided to use the white gouache to paint in the lines. I just wanted to try and break the texture into smaller compartments, but it didn't end up looking quite like I wanted. This is the downside of not planning ahead. And in the end, I just used gold leaf to embellish the circle. I only learned how to use this last week, and since it worked so well for my previous painting, I just want to use it more often, and it is beautiful and process so very satisfying. So here is the final portrait, and if you want to see how to paint more loosely with watercolor, here is another recent portrait I did, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!